All right, so let me start with my classroom. That's my classroom. It's not really a classroom, it's kind of like a concert hall. This is actually my class with my students in there. I teach 925 students. I have back-to-back sections. So I have a lot of students. So, when I started teaching in this type of classroom, my main source of visuals was PowerPoint and the typical lecture that we are familiar with. Right? So if I wanted to teach something like opportunity cost, I will start with a slide like this. I will give you some definition of opportunity cost. Then I will give you perhaps an example of opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost of being in this lecture? If I was really good, I will give you another slide, right? And that will be it, right? I will cover opportunity cost, and I will expect my students to know opportunity cost. And then I can actually ask them a question like this one on the exam. This question was used for a group of economists about 10 years ago to try to find out how much our econ students were learning in their first year econ courses in the US. So they designed a question on opportunity cost, a basic question like this one. So then they asked this question to a bunch of students taking economics first year around the US. What percentage of them were able to answer this question correctly? So that's super depressing, right? Because we're not teaching you what you need to know, right? So that's one theory, is that we're not teaching you what you need to know, particularly this basic concept of opportunity cost, and we're assuming that you know it, and we're building a bunch of other stuff on top of it, right? But then they took another theory. Well, perhaps there's another explanation. So they asked the same questions to students who had never taken an economics class around the US. What percentage of them were able to answer the question correctly? So perhaps it's not that we're not teaching you, it's that we're teaching you too much, right? And that's why you actually are not able to answer the question. No, we're making you worse off. They actually went to the AEA and gave this question to PhDs in economics and see what they have to say the answer to this question is. So perhaps the answer is that we don't even know what opportunity cost is, right? What can we learn from this? Well, I think what I learned from this, when I first gave this question to my students after reading this paper, I became really frustrated because my students didn't do a lot better than 7%. So I decided that what I needed to do is to change the way I was actually spending time in the classroom, and I needed to create more space in the classroom to spend more time with these concepts. And the only way that I can do that is by shifting some of the stuff I was doing in the classroom outside. And I think that what you should do in the classroom instead should be active learning, should be what you just did right now, which is debating this question with people around you. Now that you have some concept, for you this question has a lot of meaning, it has a lot of context, because you know, or you think you know, what opportunity cost is, right? So if the students have a little bit of context, then this activity becomes very, very rich. Right? So now my students, what they do before they come to class is to go to this website. And this website, as you can see here, has all the topics divided in the front of the website. And then each topic is 1 week, and each week has 2 lectures. And before each lecture, the student will go to one of these activities, and they will complete 2 things. One thing is a pre-lecture, which is basically a series of animated lectures. And then each of this is a video, which is about 2 minutes video. At some point during the lecture, they will have to do a really simple embedded question. If they get it wrong, they get some feedback. They can try it again, low stakes. And then the other slide become available. And then once you click on that slide, then the other slide become available. Right? So I can control the way they access this information. The whole activity is constructed so they only spend about 15 minutes on this part of the activity. There's another checkpoint part. I'm going to tell you that in a second. But the other thing is that I also give the students a visual cue with that bar on the top of how they're doing. And that way they give some reinforcement of how much they have to complete. So that's what the students actually do before coming to my class. So in essence, what I'm actually doing here is I'm taking elements of what I used to do in my class, and I'm actually taking them out of the classroom, because now what I do is I thought, well, what is the best use of my time in the classroom? What happens in that classroom that's really unique? And the unique thing about the classroom is that it's the only time in the week that I am there with them and their friends, right? So how can I actually maximize that time? And I found that the way to maximize that time is to use it in active learning like this, because there will be an activity that they won't be able to do that way in another context. So I put the lecture before. This is what they call a flipped classroom, because you put what traditionally been in the classroom, you put it before. In classroom, you do the kind of what it used to be assignments, and then you have more difficult questions. I've learned a couple of things and some motivations that I had. The first thing is that students do not read the textbook. This is what they tell me. This is about, I have a lot of students, so this is about over a few semesters. This is a data set of about 5,000 students. I mean, if you do a sample of your students, you probably get something similar. They're rational thinkers, so they don't read it because they don't think it's useful. The second thing, and perhaps an explanation as to why they're not using the textbook, is because perhaps lectures, the multimedia lecture, is a better tool at transferring information to novices, to transfer information to a person that has never been exposed to this information before. So this is what video is doing, is syncing information and allowing the students to understand this material a lot quicker because it's syncing the information for them, right? And this is actually the way we actually humans learn. Information gets to us from two channels, one a verbal and one a visual. In a video, I'm actually talking to you through the verbal channel, and you're seeing something through the visual channel, and both channels are complementing each other to enhance whatever instruction you're given. This should be no news to any of us. We have been using this way of transferring information for ages. It is the chalk and talk, right? This is a multimedia presentation. And what I'm trying to tell you now is that if you are trying to create active learning in your classroom, particularly in principles, and I'm focusing more on novices, by assigning pages of the textbook and then doing active learning in class, which is what I did for a long time, your students are going to rebel against it. They're going to probably enjoy the class, but they're going to tell you I missed the lecture. And I'm telling you that what I'm doing here is giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? Because there is something in there in cognitive theory that tells us that you standing in front of the board, talking at the same time you drawing the board, is a very effective way of transferring information to the students for the first time. Right? The multimedia presentation. It's just that it just doesn't need to happen in the classroom. It could happen somewhere else now because we have the technology at a very cheap price to do that. But we shouldn't really get rid of the lectures if we are really using them for transfer of information. And the other part is that this lecture is what Micah, I think, presented very well, is that what they do is amplify by simplifying, right? Which is we economists are very used to when constructing models and stuff. Now, all of this comes from years of research in cognitive science, and if any of you are ever interested in reading perhaps the best book on multimedia design, cognitive theory of multimedia design, years of research, I recommend you this book. It's kind of my Bible, right? And it's collected all many years of cognitive science research in the laboratory into 10 or 12 principles that are very useful. So what I did is I recruited a bunch of people, a bunch of students who had never taken an econ class. I gave them $50 to come to the lab. And I separated them in two groups, one a control in which they were going to read the textbook and answer some questions, and the other one a treatment that was actually going to watch videos of the same topic and answer the same questions. And bringing them to the lab was important because me and my research assistants were there to make sure that they were reading the textbook. It's like a dream come true, right? You have people there next to you making sure you're reading the textbook, and then you're also answering the questions. I did 3 topics: elasticity, production possibilities, frontier, and trade. This is elasticity. Red is video, gray is text. And this is just for one topic. Elasticity was actually where the video became the best. But in general, students who watch the videos score about 6 points better on the exam than students that read the text. And then I also brought them, I didn't give them the $50 until they came 2 weeks after, and then answered another exam just to see how much they remember. By the time they came 2 weeks after, the difference was already 3 points more, meaning that the difference was already 9 points. Right? So they not only understand better, but they were remembering the information a lot better. Now, not only the students learn more, but they actually thought they actually learned more. So again, I think what's happening is that we have taken the lecture for where it was traditionally placed in the learning path, and with it we have replaced, like I said, with the textbook. And I think that for novices, that perhaps is not the best way to do. I think a textbook probably become more useful when the students knows a little bit about it, has some color and to the topic that you have added to it in your lecture. Now the textbook is a lot more accessible because the students have the context to read it. Now the third thing is that even if it doesn't work, students actually like it, right? Students like multimedia lectures. I have a lot of data behind the tool that I can see how much time each student is spending. So I try to divide those students' times into 2. Students who spend more than 7 minutes, which is about half of the time I expect them to do the assignment, and students who spend less than 7 minutes. Only about 27% of students are doing that. By far, these students are really watching the lectures, right? They're watching the activity and doing it. The result of that should not be surprising, is that the students come to class better prepared because they're actually doing something before coming to class. There are different ways to test this. So one easy way of doing it is basically by comparing one semester, one with no flip, to one with flip, and giving them the same questions that they have to answer before coming to class. And as you can see, the students in the flip classroom came to class a lot better prepared, or at least answered those same questions a lot better. On average, what I found is that students that watch in the flipped classroom mode, they're watching the lectures, when they were coming to class, they were answering those questions at 70% rate correct, versus about 25%. So imagine now the audience you have and what you can do with that audience. Again, the reason why that question on opportunity cost was interesting to you is because you had some context about opportunity cost before. If I had presented that question to you without any context, it would have been a completely different exercise, right? So now you can present difficult questions to students because they have some context, at least 70% of them do. And finally, they enjoy the class more. And this should not be surprising. They have some context. They can enjoy the class more. But they also enjoy it more because I actually can use some of their answers because they're doing some stuff before class. So I can use some of that information in my class. So this is the second part. It's a checkpoint. At the checkpoint, is basically should take them 5 minutes. It's just one multiple choice question that's supposed to be more difficult, perhaps a little ambiguous, right? A little tricky, right? Interesting. And then after that, they just simply have to tell me why they answer, how they answer. This is low stakes. I only give them credit for completion, right? But what I can do is, as an instructor, I can go and get certain important information. The first one is how they answer, and I can see what are the popular choices, and perhaps I can use that in my lecture. I can clearly eliminate A if I ask this question again in lecture because most people are not voting for that. But then I can also try to see and read their answers, right? And I get a lot of information about their answer. This I have a lot of students, so like I see, a lot of them write a lot of stuff. This is low stakes, but they still write a lot of stuff. But since it's a lot of information and I want to scan this in about an hour before class, I divide this or I sort this in different ways. One is by organizing it by the time the students spend in the lecture. I can organize it for the people who spend the most to people who spend the least amount of time. But then I can also go and separate it by the answer. So I can see, well, what did people that only answered the right question have to say? Or what did people that only answer the second question have to say? So that way I can sort through all these answers pretty quickly. And I don't want to go through all of them, but I just simply want to get interesting ones. Because what I'm going to do in class is I am going to use the same, I'm going to show them the same question, and then I'm going to ask them to vote again, right? To give me the questions. I mean, now they're not alone, but they have their students next to them. And I can complement this with more information that I got from them. For instance, I can tell them, well, before you vote, let me tell you what one person said that voted for Sally. There's no most interesting breeding of stuff that your own students. See, these students went to Wikipedia, right, to find information about the average words per minute that people do, and gave all this really long, convoluted explanation for the wrong answer, right? Ultimately, you also give them the right answer, or you give them the right explanation, and then you can ask them to vote again. And now this is a more rich question because they have a lot more context to deal with. I can also tell them how they voted. This is how you voted before, right? So how do you vote now? So the way I see this, I started thinking a lot about technology and stuff because I don't know if you know the typewriter, the last one was built in 2011. Things we know as a common secret, they tend to get better and cheaper, right? So here's the classroom, late 1800s. For the most part, this classroom has stayed the same, right? Now, why is that? Because the classroom, this well, has been around for a long time, right? And textbooks did not take them out of business. So I think to me, that is the best explanation that you cannot replace the multimedia lecture, the chalk and talk with the textbook, right? Because the textbook did not get them out of business, right? But this is a very effective use of space for one person to deliver information to a group of people. It's very effective, right? But you have to ask yourself whether we need that anymore, right? We don't need that type of setup anymore. It's not it's not an efficient way of resources now that you can deliver a lot of the stuff in a cheaper way to people. So if I'm right, and this is actually a dramatic change in the technology used for education, I should expect classrooms to change. And I think they would change to something like this or like that. Now, this classroom, what it does is that it takes advantage of everyone is there together at the same time, instructor and students, and they can collaborate with each other. That is the part that is very difficult to recreate outside of the classroom, right? So anyway, I think that that will be the case. I think if I'm right, when we will actually have classrooms that become cheaper and better.